Welcome to this special edition of the NWA XCHANGE podcast. This interview was made possible by the support of the Grove Comedy Club and Entertainment Complex and the Goat Lab Brewery. Today we're interviewing Joshua Robinson, candidate for circuit judge. Get ready for an insightful conversation about Joshua's experience as a community leader, chief deputy prosecutor, and his inspiration for running for circuit judge. Let's get started.
Well, hey, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to join us here and help educate the voters about your race. Let's start off by telling us about yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is great. I love getting to talk to people. So I'm running for Benton County Circuit Judge, Division 6. It's actually Judicial District 19 West, which in our case is just Benton County. Right now I'm the Chief Deputy Prosecuting Attorney. I've been in the prosecutor's office since September of 2015. I was appointed by Governor Sanders to be the prosecuting attorney for all of 2024 and part of 2023 when Nathan Smith, who was our elected, left for another job. And I've held all positions of leadership within the office, from a felony division chief, managing a small team of attorneys, to a senior deputy prosecutor, senior trial attorney, where I supervised all the trial work in the office and supervised all the attorneys. Then I was the appointed prosecutor, obviously, and ran the whole office. And now I'm chief deputy, so I'm kind of the number 2 guy in the office. I supervise all the attorneys, all the support staff, kind of make sure everything runs. I went to law school a little bit late in life. I was actually had been married for some time and had our first child when I started law school. And my wife started grad school. Went to Tulane University Law School in New Orleans. Originally born in Russellville. And preacher's kid, so I've moved around a bunch, lived all over the place. My wife is from Van Buren, met her at church down there. Shortly after getting married in 2002, we moved to Denver to help my dad and brother start a nonprofit ministry working with homeless and at-risk youth. Did that for a long time while we got our undergraduate degrees. We spent several years there. And so then went to law school a little bit later in life after being in the nonprofit sector for a long time.
Awesome. So since you're currently and previously spent a lot of your career, seeking convictions,
Mm-hmm.
How do you transition to being an impartial party and listening to all of the angles?
Yeah, so I'll correct you a little bit, right? So a common misconception is that prosecutors seek convictions, right? And we measure success by if we get a conviction. It's actually not true. And so our whole job description is to do justice. We don't represent individual clients. We represent the state of Arkansas as a whole, Benton County in my case in particular. And so, what I told somebody one time was that I've done more for criminal defendants in 1 year than many defense attorneys do in a career, right? Because when cases come in, we're the first stop of review, and many cases never get filed, never go to court, because we look at it and say, no, we don't really think that we could prove this beyond a reasonable doubt, or we're not sure that this search was done right and this evidence is going to come in. And so we're actually the first sort of filter, right? And a lot of people, especially defense attorneys, wouldn't agree with the idea that we're sort of impartial. But we really are. When we first get a case that comes in, or in many cases, I regularly work with law enforcement, state, local, and federal, on investigations, and we'll guide them, oftentimes telling them, look, we don't need to make an arrest in this case because we're not going to be able to prove it. We don't have enough evidence. And so, but once there is an arrest, once the case comes, if we review it, we have the evidence and we're convinced beyond a reasonable doubt, we file the charge. Then we are sort of an advocate for our side. But it was really an impartial review up to that point,
Sure.
Right? Once we get to that point. And then another thing that we have to do is, since we don't represent an individual client, we represent the state. As we go through processing the case, whether it goes to a jury trial, let's say if it goes to a jury trial, then prosecutors also work to protect the record, right? And what that means is if somebody's convicted at trial, they appeal it and say, this evidence shouldn't have come in, or, there was a mistake, then the conviction can be overturned and you have to go and try the whole thing again, right? And that puts victims through a lot of stress. and it's a big use of resources. So as we're going through a trial, prosecutors also manage the trial to make sure that there's not evidence coming in that shouldn't. So we don't ever put in a piece of evidence just because we think we can maybe trick the judge into letting us get it in, because we know it's coming back. And so through the whole process, we're actually working to make sure that the defendant has a fair trial too. And so we're working to get a conviction if we've decided to file, but we're also working to protect the case and make sure all of his constitutional or her constitutional rights are protected. So a prosecuting attorney, I think, more than any other attorney, probably is closer to a judge in the sense that we have to make so many decisions. You know, we talk to the police, should we approve an arrest or not? Should we approve a search warrant or not? What kind of evidence should come in? Should we be filing these types of cases? And then policy matters, right? Of, you know, what do we as an office, as a community think this type of crime, what kind of punishment should go along with that and all that. So I don't know that it'll be a huge shift in thinking, actually. That was a long answer to a short question.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. It's a good call out too about we're not just seeking convictions. We actually look at a bigger picture. So good call out.
In the Benton County criminal justice system, what areas do you see in your mind are open to a lot of improvement?
I mean, there's lots of areas, but you know,
The most impactful.
I will say that we do a really good job generally. One of the things I think that everybody can work on everywhere in the country is being as efficient as possible in processing cases, right? And everybody complains that it takes too long for a case to resolve, and that's hard on victims or plaintiffs. It's hard on defendants, right? It's hard on everybody. So doing the best we can to try to manage the workload and process the cases.
So it's more like a triage right now. I mean, are you over capacity? I guess
It's always a triage.
Okay.
We are not over capacity relative to what it looks like to be a prosecutor or a public defender. You know, we all have a bunch of cases. Right now, my caseload is low because I supervise the whole office, right? So I help everybody with their things. But there have been times over the last 10 years in the office that I've had 400 or 500 open cases at a given time, right? And for long periods of time. And that would stretch me, but that's sort of normal, right? So is that overcapacity? Probably, but we've learned to deal with it.
Right.
But I think just doing everything we can to continue to have the court dates when we need to have them, process the cases, and a judge is really heavily involved in that process in terms of making sure the attorneys are doing the things they're supposed to be doing to move cases along, set court dates and things like that.
Okay.
If you had the authority to change one law, which would it be and why?
That's a good question. I don't know if this is one that I would want to change, but I'll say that we still have a crime on the books for bear exploitation, like bear baiting.
Okay.
So I don't know. Like, I don't have any interest in exploiting bears, but I just think it's kind of a funny law. You know, one of the things I've run into is being a prosecutor in Arkansas in particular. Prosecutors are very restricted and limited in what they can appeal, right? When a case ends, a criminal defendant has almost infinite possibilities to appeal things. As a prosecutor, it's a very, very, very narrow scope of what can be appealed. And so there are times when we feel like maybe something should have gone another way, we should have gotten a different ruling, and justice wasn't done, and we can't appeal it. And it happens a lot. So that's one that I think, practically speaking, it was like maybe give prosecutors a little bit more ability to appeal things.
Sure.
So in Benton County, we've seen explosive growth. We've seen a lot of people come into this area. How does that affect the criminal trends? What are you seeing from your perspective?
In terms of general numbers or specific crimes?
Yeah, specific crimes and the criminal cases.
So with more people comes more crime, generally. Although I believe, anecdotally, that we're actually, although our crime is maybe increasing, I think the proportionality of the increase is actually working in our favor. So the crime is not increasing nearly as fast as the population. So I think in Benton County, we're doing a really good job of, sort of keeping that tamped down, right? One of the troubling trends that I've seen is youthful offenders and violent crime and guns and shootings. It frequently revolves around marijuana vape pens and things like that we see these kids shooting each other over. So that's been a disturbing trend. And then as technology increases, we're seeing more internet crimes against children, child exploitation, human trafficking, things like that. Some of that is us learning more, right? And so we're recognizing it.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's happening a whole lot more than it used to, but technology is giving the opportunity for predators also to victimize kids.
You see an increase in domestic situations?
I don't know that I've seen an increase. I mean, it's a problem. It's always been a problem.
Right.
But nothing has stood out to me as a sharp increase. I think we saw a little bit maybe during COVID lockdown stuff, as far as adults, and we probably saw a little bit of a drop off in terms of kids because they weren't going to school with bruises and teacher hotlining them and things like that. So,
yeah, if a former opposing colleague, attorney, or defendant or plaintiff appears in your court, how would you handle those issues?
well, under certain circumstances, I would have to recuse, right? And so if I had prosecuted an individual in the past and then they were to get arrested again and appear in front of me in court, then I would recuse, right? Because I had previously been adversarial to them. In terms of attorneys, though, there's not very often a reason to recuse or have a conflict. Those things can arise, but just because I've gone against somebody or worked with somebody in the past doesn't mean that I have to recuse necessarily.
Okay.
What qualities do you think are very important to be a circuit judge that you think?
Humility, maybe number one, right? I mean, I think if you take for granted that all the candidates have the basic qualifications to be a judge, and I think we all do, right? Humility, wisdom, those are the big things. Good temperament, work ethic, somebody that, a judge has a lot of power in their courtroom. And it's nice when a judge is, treats people, I would say gently, but, with courtesy and things like that, while at the same time maintaining professionality of the courtroom. It should be something that the community has faith in, where professionals go and they may fight, but they're professional with each other, right? But I think a judge that has a heart, is humble, wise, and then maybe a sort of an absence of activism is one of the most important things to me. One of the reasons I'm running is a judge should follow the law. They don't make it, even if they don't like it, right? And Antonin Scalia famously said one time, you show me a judge that's always happy with the results of their rulings, and I'll show you a bad judge, right?
Sure.
I want to get, you just gave me a segue to the next question.
Okay.
Was the activist judge in Minnesota? I don't know if you're familiar with, just recently happened. It was a $7.2 million Medicaid.
No, I'm not
case.
familiar.
Okay. So I guess our question is, what kind of recourse do we have when you have activist judges that aren't following the Constitution, but being politically motivated?
Well, it kind of depends on what type of judge they are, right? If they're federal and they're appointed by the president, there's very little you can do. You can appeal individual cases up and try to get the outcome reversed. In Arkansas, our judges are elected. And so like any other elected official, you could vote for somebody else. Cases can always be appealed, though, if there's a bad outcome. But oftentimes, there's not much you can do. And that's why it's critically important that people pick the right people to be on the bench. And we're going to have, January of 2027, we're going to have 4 new circuit judges. Half of our circuit judges in Benton County are going to be brand new. And so that is going to be mean a lot to what the next 20, 30, 40 years in Benton County looks like, because they're resolving individual disputes, right? Cases, but they're building policy sort of in the way they handle certain things, and making rulings, right, that sort of like rule over the county unless it's ever overturned by a higher court. And so I think this is an incredibly important election. And I think the type of person you put on the bench is so, so important. If you take for granted that they have the basic qualifications, myself and my opponent, I think are both qualified to do the job, right? So
Yeah, I like how you said treat them gently, because it's important for me to remind the viewers that, you know, nobody's walking into the courtroom on a winning streak, right?
yeah,
So
no, it's in a bad spot, and that's something too. I think that we see, and I'm in court all the time, and I've handled, wouldn't even guess how many cases, and so many things can become routine and unremarkable through the whole process. And it dawned on me after being in this job for 3 or 4 years that I wasn't shocked anymore when I would get a case of a woman who, you know, had her nose broken, her orbital socket broken in front of her newborn baby and choked until she passed out. And there was 2 or 3 years into the job, I was just like, oh yeah, it's another one of these, you know? And so I try to be really, really intentional about reminding myself, you know, that was probably the worst day in that woman's life. In every case that I handle, somebody is in a terrible situation. Even the criminal defendants, the choices I make will affect the rest of their lives and their kids and their families. And so I think we have to be really careful as judges and lawyers also to not forget that these are real people, real individuals. Maybe their livelihoods are on the line, even if it's a civil case. You know, they might be bankrupt depending on what you do. And so I think that's really important to have a judge that cares about people as well, not only kind to the attorneys, but to the litigants too.
How do you decompress after, I mean, me personally, these child abuse cases and what have you, they really affect me. I think more than ever when I had kids, you know, and understand it's horrible. How do you remove yourself, or can you remove yourself from a situation like that when you're outside?
Yeah, so my wife's a therapist, and she would tell you that I do not do a good job of that, right? I sort of like package it up and shove it way down deep inside and don't deal with it. It has a real effect on people, right? Secondary trauma, whatever, you take enough of this stuff in, and it affects who you are for sure. And you know, for the first few years I worked in the office, if I was ever asked to work on a child sex abuse crime or something like that, I would say no thanks. I don't want anything to do with that. You know, I've got kids. I don't want to see that stuff. A few years into the job, a few people left the office, and I was in a position now where I was a supervisor, and we didn't have enough people that were experienced, so I had to start working on those. And didn't want to do it, but there's been nothing more gratifying than going and fighting for one of those kids, right? And the look on their face when they see that you believe them, you're fighting for them. I don't know that I've ever done anything more meaningful in my life than that. And I've worked on some really difficult cases.
Yeah, I think the biggest one I can remember was the Torres case in 2015 in Bella Vista. That was just heart-wrenching to me.
Yeah, that one. So that went to trial when I first started in the office. So I wasn't on that one.
Okay.
Although I did help them a little bit.
Oh, you're familiar with that case?
Oh, yeah. Watched all 3 trials. But yeah, I've had multiple child homicides that I've worked, a bunch of child sex abuse, physical abuse, and things like that. And you know, people do horrible things to each other.
yeah,
and that's hard.
what is the most significant case that you've handled in your career, and how did it shape your frame of reference on justice and the rule of law?
I'll give you 3 because there are at least 3, but maybe more. one of the things that I'm most proud of was prosecuting Shauna Cash. She killed Kevin Apple, Pea Ridge police officer.
Police officer, sure.
And so I worked on that case from start to finish, gave it my heart and soul, got to know Kevin's mom, still talk to her every now and then. That changed me, just that going through learning about Kevin as a person, because I didn't know him, but learning about him as a person and how giving he was and kind he was to people. But also the community of Pea Ridge. It was such a heartening and inspiring case in the way that this community reacted, right? And so, to sum it up really, really short, Shauna Cash runs Kevin Apple over the White Oak Station parking lot and drags him 150 feet, kills him. His partner is firing the gun. And instead of people scattering, people run to Kevin Apple. 2 civilians chase Shauna Cash, one of them driving a wrecker, chase her all the way into Bella Vista, calling out on 911 where they're going so police could catch up to them and find them. Wow. And then multiple people sat with him, prayed with him, and talked to him as he died. I'll never be the same. After talking to those people and seeing that stuff, it changed me. There was a case, Hunter De La Garza was the defendant, and he was accused of raping a 10-year-old girl who was at the children's shelter. And he was working at the children's shelter and had taken her somewhere. And it was a really difficult case. We had almost no evidence. Most of the time in child sex cases, it's just their testimony. We had little more than that. But I had gotten to know this little girl, talked to her multiple times, talked to her family, believed in the case. And we went and tried that case. I told Nathan, who's my boss at the time, I walked in and said, hey, we start trial tomorrow. I just wanted you to know we're probably going to lose, but I'm going to do my best. Don't be mad at me. We got a conviction and jury sentenced him to life without parole. 25 years old, had no criminal history. And that was a really good one. And then one of the cases that has impacted my career the most probably was a guy named Corey Westglenn. And it was the first time I had messed with a human trafficking case. I'd never read the statute until I inherited that case from somebody else. And up to that point, only one other prosecutor in the state had tried human trafficking to a jury. It was something that nobody was charging. And so I had to learn about the charge and the culture and everything, working with FBI as I was preparing for trial in this case. Went to trial, got a conviction. He was sentenced to 125, 135 years, I don't remember, something like that. But he was selling a teenage girl, underage girl, prostituting her out of his house.
Wow.
What do you say to someone fresh out of law school that wants to be a prosecuting attorney?
I think there's no better job as a lawyer. I think if you talk to just about any career prosecutor, they would tell you the same thing. I think it's the best first job you can get out of law school, even if you don't want to do it forever. Prosecutors make decisions all day. It teaches you how to be decisive, right? Teaches you how to be decisive and wise with really substantial issues. You are the ones that make the case go forward or not, right? And so you have to make all these decisions. You get to be in courtroom a lot. You get to try a lot of cases. And so it's fantastic. The other nice thing about being a prosecutor is you prosecute cases you believe in. You don't have a client that's paying you. So I tell people all the time, I've never said anything to a jury that I didn't 100% believe. Right? I've never asked a jury to do something I wouldn't do, because I don't have a client that's paying me, telling me to file some stupid motion, right, or make an argument that I don't believe in. I get to decide. So if I don't believe in a case, I don't file the case. And so that's a huge luxury that most attorneys don't have, is being able to really just do what you believe is right.
Sure. If you were elected, is there any specialized court programs that you would implement? Night court, any rehabilitative style courts? Is there anything for this particular bench that would be beneficial to I guess we call them your clients?
Well, they would be the litigants in the courtroom. I think, right off the bat, what I would do is get a feel for how the docket is moving already, right? So I would inherit a caseload, and see where those things are going, and then get used to the rhythm of the courtroom, and then start to look at, okay, how can we make things more efficient? What are some needs that aren't being met? One of the things that I would do is work hard, be in the office, read the pleadings, the motions, the papers that the attorneys write, be prepared when I go into court, right? That's another advantage of being a prosecutor. In the past, somebody told me early on, if you're a prosecutor, the job can be as easy or as hard as you want it to be, because you can always make a plea offer that's lower than it should be, but save you some time and save you some work. And so you have to be intentional and principled. And I have been, and so that's something that I would bring to the bench. And when you're a judge, nobody can say anything to you. And so if you show up for court and you haven't read the briefs that the attorneys wrote, there's nothing they can do about it, right? They just got to try to argue to you to give you the information. But it's a really frustrating thing as an attorney, is that you want the judge to be prepared and read up on the appropriate cases and the facts and all those kinds of things. And so that's something that I can do that's easy, is just have my butt in my chair in the office, right, and do the work. So that's one thing.
What do you say about people that are disenfranchised, feel like the system's broken? Why waste our time? Why even vote anymore? What do you say to those people?
I can empathize, right? It does feel that way at times. And in fact, I was a person for the longest time that had no interest in running for anything ever. Didn't watch political stuff on TV, would get frustrated by the whole process. But then having worked for state government, for the last decade, and seeing that it really matters a lot who's elected, and local politics is incredibly important. At the end of the day, who the president is doesn't have a huge impact on your day-to-day life. But your local county judge, circuit judge, sheriff, school board, that changes your day-to-day.
For sure.
And the amount of people that come out to vote is so small generally that your vote really does count, really does matter. And it was one of the reasons I decided to run, was because I knew how important it was going to be that half of our bench is going to be new, and it's going to affect the culture of the county moving forward. And was expressing, to my wife, concern about, man, what if this person runs or this person runs? I wouldn't like that. So, well, you should do it. So that's kind of why I'm here. But it matters because in an election this size, every vote actually counts.
Sure. If the viewers wanted to learn more about you or get involved or maybe even help you out, how do they contact you? Do you have, where would you send them?
Yeah, so my website, robinsonforjudge.org, is there. If you want to know a little bit more about who I am as a person, you can follow me on social media. It's on there. You can look me up from my website. You got the links on there to the social media. You can also Google newspaper articles. I've handled a lot of cases that have been in the news, especially when I was the prosecuting attorney. I did a lot of news interviews and things like that, and people can get a real sense of who I am, which is unique. It's almost impossible for people to learn about judicial candidates and actually know who they are. It's almost impossible.
I agree. I think that's one of the motivating factors behind doing these interviews.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So March 3rd's fastly approaching.
Sure is.
Man, it's flying by, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what can you tell people that are going to go to the polls? They're going to vote. What separates you from other people?
Yeah. So what I'll say, I'm not going to say anything bad about my opponent. I like him. We get along well. I think he would do fine. But I do think that I'm unique and different from every other candidate because of my background, right? Because I worked blue-collar jobs with my wife, worked multiple jobs, went through my undergraduate degree as a married person because I wanted to do better for my family. going to law school after having my first child, and after spending years and years working with homeless and at-risk youth in Denver, Colorado, and being friends with heroin addicts and meth addicts, and having lost a lot of them to overdoses or homicide, and spending time with those people, I developed a real care and concern for individual people. Went to law school so that I could help people, and have, as a prosecutor, been making sure that the integrity of the system is being upheld, and working with victims, fighting for kids. There's nobody in the state that's done more on the topic of human trafficking in terms of prosecuting those cases and investigating those cases. There's not any other prosecutor in the state that's done what I have. And that's not to brag. It's just that I saw a need and started to learn more about it. And I had some good people that taught me a lot. I'm a man of faith, and I prioritize my faith and God and my family. I've got 3 amazing kids, an amazing wife. We've been married since 2002. I was 23, she was 19. We've been together forever, grown up together. But I bring that unique perspective with me to being a prosecutor and to being a judge. And I've had a lot of time of trying to make hard decisions and trying to do the right thing. And I think that I'm unique in my background from all the other candidates. I'm Joshua Robinson. The election is March the 3rd. I'm asking for your vote of confidence. I'm asking you to tell your friends to vote for me because I think that I share your values. And it's important that we have somebody on the bench that has the right worldview and the right values. And I'm that person. And I'd be grateful for your vote on March the 3rd.